There's one address in America that pulls in more visitors every year than almost any other private home in the country, and yet the most talked about part of it has never been photographed, filmed, or opened to a single paying guest. Graceland, the Memphis mansion Elvis Presley bought in 1957, has welcomed more than 20 million tourists since it opened its doors to the public in 1982. They walk through the jungle room with its shag carpet climbing the ceiling. They stand in the meditation garden where Elvis is buried alongside his parents and, since 2023, his daughter Lisa Marie Presley. They admire the gold records, the jumpsuits, the cars. But there is a staircase near the front hall that every single one of those 20 million visitors has been stopped from climbing. The second floor of Graceland, the private living quarters where Elvis actually slept, read, and ultimately died, has been sealed off from the public since the day he passed away in August 1977. For nearly 50 years, that floor has existed as one of the most durable mysteries in American pop culture, a space everyone knows about and almost no one has seen. That mystery has only deepened because of who now controls it. When Lisa Marie Presley died suddenly in January 2023, ownership of Graceland passed to her daughter, Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter, and now, at just in her mid-30s, the person legally and emotionally responsible for one of the most recognizable estates in the world. Keough inherited not just a historic property, but a set of decisions no one else in the family had faced in this way before: what to preserve, what to share, and what should simply stay private. In the years since, she has spoken publicly in interviews and public appearances about what Graceland means to her and how she thinks about protecting it. Comments that offer real, if limited, insight into a home most of us will only ever see through a velvet rope. To understand why the upstairs holds so much weight, it helps to remember that Graceland wasn't always a monument. The house was built in 1939 by a Memphis businessman named S.E. Tuff for his daughter, Ruth Moore, and her husband. It was a graceful but modest colonial revival home on farmland outside the city, defined by white columns and a wide front porch, nothing like the sprawling estate people picture today. Elvis Presley bought it in 1957 for just over $100,000, when he was only 22 years old and already engulfed by the kind of fame no young performer before him had really experienced. What drew him to the property wasn't its size. It was the distance it put between him and the crowds that had started following him everywhere he went. Over the next 2 decades, Elvis reshaped Graceland into something that reflected exactly who he was, contradictions and all. The Jungle Room, added in the late 1960s, became one of the house's most famous spaces, a green-carpeted, tiki-inspired lounge that doubled as a home recording studio, where Elvis cut some of his final tracks, including Moody Blue, during sessions in 1976. The meditation garden, built in 1964, became a quiet, reflective space behind the main house, and later the site of his grave. By the time Graceland opened to tourists 5 years after his death, it had already become something more than a residence. It had become shorthand for an entire era of American music and celebrity. And through all of it, the upstairs stayed exactly what it had always been for Elvis, the one part of the house that belonged only to him. The decision to seal the second floor wasn't a marketing choice made once Graceland became a tourist attraction. It happened immediately, in the days after Elvis died on August 16, 1977, and it was driven by his father, Vernon Presley, who wanted the space where his son had lived and where he had passed away left undisturbed. That decision has essentially held ever since. When Graceland opened to the public in 1982, tours were built around the ground floor and the outbuildings specifically because the family had already decided the second floor was not for public viewing, and it never has been. Over the decades, that silence has invited a lot of speculation, some of it far-fetched. Fan theories have floated everything from secret preserved rooms to claims that the space was sealed to hide some kind of cover-up. The far more grounded explanation, and the one that fits everything the Presley family has actually said publicly over the years, is simpler: grief. Losing Elvis at 42 was sudden and public in a way few deaths have ever been. And for his family, the upstairs wasn't a set of rooms to be curated for an audience. It was where he had actually lived his last, most private years. treating it as untouchable wasn't about secrecy for its own sake. It was about not turning a home into an exhibit before anyone in the family was ready. Riley Keough has spoken about this in broad terms in interviews since taking over the estate, describing her approach to Graceland as thinking of it as a living space connected to her family rather than simply a museum to be managed. She has talked about wanting people to understand Elvis as a person, not just the version of him frozen in gold records and rhinestone jumpsuits, while also being clear that some parts of the house and the family's history are going to stay private. That balance between opening up the story and protecting the space is really the through line of everything she has said publicly about her role since 2023. It's worth being honest about the limits of public knowledge here, because that's exactly what keeps this topic alive. There is no verified on-the-record account from Riley Keough or anyone else in the family describing a detailed inventory of what sits inside Elvis's former bedroom, bathroom, or private study today. No interview has confirmed hidden shoeboxes, secret letters, or specific unpublished recordings tucked away up there. What we do have is a long public record of general statements, that the space has remained closed since 1977, that it holds deep personal significance to the family, and that Graceland's approach, through generations of family stewardship, has always been to treat that floor as private rather than promotional. That distinction matters, because a lot of content about Graceland's second floor blurs the line between this is documented, and this would make a great story. The tunnel rumor is a good example of exactly that blurring. For years, some fans and a handful of former staff members have claimed there's a hidden underground passage running from the main house toward the rear of the property, supposedly built so Elvis could move around without being seen. It's a compelling image, the reclusive superstar with a secret escape route beneath his own mansion. But there is no verified blueprint, no photographic evidence, and no confirmation from the Presley family or from Graceland's official archives that any such tunnel exists. The publicly available floor plans of the property don't show one. That doesn't prove a negative, but it does mean the tunnel remains, at best, an unconfirmed rumor rather than an established fact. No conversation about Graceland's sealed second floor is complete without touching on the theory that simply won't die, that Elvis never actually passed away in 1977. It's one of the most enduring conspiracy theories in American pop culture, and it didn't spring from nowhere. Elvis's final years really were marked by declining health, a much lower public profile, and a documented dependence on prescription medication, all of which is well established through his autopsy and the reporting around his death at the time. To some fans, that combination, a superstar pulling away from the world just before dying at 42, felt too abrupt, and the theory that he staged his own disappearance took root almost immediately. Stories built on top of that foundation over the years, sightings at grocery stores, a supposed appearance under an alias at an airport shortly after his death, photographs of unidentified men that fans insisted were an aged Elvis in hiding. None of these accounts have ever held up to scrutiny. Elvis's death was confirmed through an official autopsy. His body was viewed by family members at the time, and his funeral was public and extensively documented. The Elvis is alive theory persists not because of any credible evidence, but because so little of his final year was seen by the public. He wasn't touring, wasn't giving interviews, and was spending most of his time in the one part of Graceland nobody else could access. That gap in public visibility is exactly what conspiracy theories tend to grow in, whether or not there's anything actually hidden there. Whatever mysteries remain about the house itself, there is nothing mysterious about the legal and financial weight of the Presley estate. Since Elvis's death in 1977, ownership has passed through a single well-documented line. Lisa Marie Presley inherited the estate as his only child, and when she died in January 2023, ownership transferred to her daughter, Riley Keough. That transition was not entirely smooth. Priscilla Presley, Lisa Marie's mother, publicly contested a 2016 amendment to the family trust shortly after Lisa Marie's death, raising questions about how decisions over the estate would be made going forward. The dispute was ultimately settled out of court in 2023, with Keough retaining control as trustee. That settlement matters because it underlines something easy to forget behind all the talk of hidden rooms and secret tunnels. Graceland is also functionally a business, one that reportedly generates tens of millions of dollars a year through tourism, licensing, and merchandising. Over the decades, a number of individuals have come forward claiming to be Elvis's biological children beyond Lisa Marie, hoping to stake a claim to that inheritance. Some of these claims have reached courtrooms. One man reportedly sought a court order to exhume Elvis's remains for DNA testing, a request that was denied. None of these paternity claims have been substantiated through verified DNA evidence with a documented chain of custody, and the estate has consistently declined to validate them. It's a reminder that behind the emotional pull of secret heirs and hidden legacies, there's a very real legal structure, the Elvis Presley Trust, built specifically to manage exactly these kinds of claims. One of the more grounded mysteries surrounding Graceland has nothing to do with tunnels or sightings. It's about tape. Elvis's final studio sessions took place not in a professional studio, but inside Graceland itself, in the Jungle Room, across two stretches of recording in February and October of 1976. Those sessions produced tracks like Moody Blue and Way Down, along with a handful of gospel covers, and RCA released much of that material both before and after his death. But audio engineers and musicians who worked with Elvis in that period have said publicly in interviews over the years that not everything recorded during that time made it to an official release. Some material was left incomplete or simply set aside as his health declined. This has fed a long-running fascination with lost Elvis recordings, and it's an area where fact and fabrication get tangled easily. Over the decades, a number of bootleg tapes claiming to feature unheard Elvis vocals have circulated among collectors, and at least one widely discussed bootleg from the 1990s, purportedly a haunting, unreleased ballad recorded shortly before his death, was later shown to actually feature a vocal impersonator rather than Elvis himself. That's a useful case study for how these rumors spread. A compelling story, a hard-to-verify recording, and years of circulation before anyone manages to debunk it. What is genuinely true is that RCA and later Sony have released numerous box sets over the years compiling alternate takes, outtakes, and previously unreleased material from Elvis's catalog, meaning the official vault has been opened before, just selectively, through curated commercial projects rather than a single dramatic reveal. What has come through clearly in Riley Keough's public comments since 2023 is a fairly consistent philosophy. She wants Graceland understood as a place tied to a real family, not simply packaged as a museum exhibit. In interviews, she has talked about supporting educational partnerships that position her grandfather as a subject worth serious study, his influence on music, his complicated relationship with race and American culture, his place in the story of 20th century fame, rather than treating him purely as a nostalgia act. She has also spoken about ongoing efforts to properly archive and preserve Graceland's existence.